On a sweltering March morning in 1974, on the remote Philippine island of Lubang, a small, wiry man emerged from the jungle. He was 52 years old, erect but emaciated, wearing a uniform that had been patched so many times it barely held together. In his hands he carried a functioning Arisaka Type 99 rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and a dagger his mother had given him in 1944 to kill himself with if captured. His name was Hiroo Onoda, and for the past 29 years he had been fighting a war that ended in 1945. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19, 1922, in Kamikawa, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. At 17, he went to work for a trading company in Wuhan, China, where Japanese forces had occupied the city in 1938. In 1942, he was conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Army. Unlike most soldiers, Onoda was selected for special training. He attended the prestigious Nakano School, the Army's training center for intelligence officers, where he studied guerrilla warfare, philosophy, history, martial arts, propaganda, and covert operations. He learned how to survive behind enemy lines, how to gather intelligence, and, most crucially, how to never, ever surrender. On December 26, 1944, Second Lieutenant Onoda received his assignment. He was sent to Lubang Island, approximately 75 miles southwest of Manila in the Philippines. His orders were straightforward but critical. Destroy the island's airstrip and pier, sabotage any enemy planes or boats that attempted to land, and lead guerrilla operations behind enemy lines. But there was another order, one that would shape the next 3 decades of his life. His commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, gave him final instructions before the Americans landed. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you. Under no circumstances are you to surrender to the enemy or take your own life. Onoda took those words as sacred duty. When American and Philippine Commonwealth forces landed on Lubang on February 28, 1945, the Japanese defenders were quickly overwhelmed. Most surrendered or were killed. But Onoda and 3 other soldiers, Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka, retreated into the island's dense mountainous jungle. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from all communication. But they had their orders. The 4 men survived on bananas, coconuts, and stolen rice from local villages. They occasionally killed cows for meat, drying the beef to preserve it. They built bamboo huts, patched their uniforms with whatever materials they could find, and kept their rifles meticulously clean and functional. And they continued their mission. They conducted guerrilla activities, gathered intelligence, and considered themselves at war. On several occasions, they engaged in shootouts with locals and police, believing them to be enemy guerrillas. Over the years, approximately 30 Filipino islanders were killed in these skirmishes. The war ends, but they don't believe it. On September 2, 1945, Japan formally surrendered aboard the USS Missouri. The war was over, but deep in the jungles of Lubang, no one delivered the message. In October 1945, Onoda's group found a leaflet. It read, "The war ended on 15th August. Come down from the mountains." They studied it carefully. They concluded it was Allied propaganda, a trick to lure them out. Toward the end of 1945, more leaflets were dropped from the air, this time bearing a surrender order from General Tomoyuki Yamashita of the Japanese 14th Area Army. The men examined it closely, debating its authenticity. Again, they decided it was a forgery. If the war was truly over, they reasoned, why would they still be fired upon? Why would search parties still hunt them? The years passed. In 1950, Private Akatsu could endure no longer. He separated from the group and surrendered to Philippine forces after 6 months on his own. The remaining 3 considered this a betrayal and became even more cautious. In February 1952, aircraft dropped letters from the soldiers' families. Photographs, pleas to come home. The group concluded it was another trick. In June 1953, Corporal Shimada was wounded in a shootout with local fishermen. Onoda nursed him back to health, but their luck would not hold. On May 7, 1954, Shimada was killed in a shootout with a Philippine Army mountain unit that accidentally encountered the soldiers during training. Now only 2 remained, Onoda and Kazuka. Alone, For nearly 2 more decades, the two men continued their vigil. They moved carefully, staying hidden, surviving on their wits and the jungle's meager provisions. In 1959, the Japanese government, concluding that no one could survive that long in such conditions, officially declared Hiroo Onoda dead. But he was very much alive. On October 19, 1972, the impossible happened. Kozuka, now 48 years old, was conducting a raid with Onoda, burning piles of rice harvested by villagers, a signal they intended to alert Japanese forces that they were still carrying out their duties. Local police encountered them. In the shootout that followed, Kozuka was killed. Hiroo Onoda was now completely alone. For the first time in 27 years, he had no comrades, but he still had his orders. Enter Norio Suzuki. Suzuki was a young Japanese university dropout, an adventurer traveling the world. Before leaving Japan, he told his friends he had a mission. He was going to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman in that order. Remarkably, after only 4 days of searching on Lubang in February 1974, Suzuki found his man. Onoda later described their meeting. This hippie boy, Suzuki, came to the island to listen to the feelings of a Japanese soldier. They talked for hours. Suzuki explained that the war had ended long ago, that Japan was a different place now. Onoda listened politely, but shook his head. He was waiting for orders. He named Major Taniguchi, his former commander, as the only person who could relieve him of duty. Suzuki returned to Japan with photographs as proof. The Japanese government located Taniguchi, now a retired bookseller living a quiet life. They explained the situation. Taniguchi agreed to go. On March 9, 1974, Onoda approached a pre-arranged meeting spot with his usual caution. He had left a message box with Suzuki, and a note had told him to come. But even now, he feared a trap. "I stood still, waiting for what was to follow," Onoda later wrote in his memoir. "I felt sure Major Taniguchi would come up to me and whisper, 'That was so much talk. I will tell you your real orders later.'" Then Taniguchi emerged from a tent, fully dressed in military uniform, an army cap on his head. Onoda snapped to attention and barked out, "Lieutenant Onoda, sir, reporting for orders." Taniguchi read the order aloud. "In accordance with the Imperial Command, the 14th Area Army has ceased all combat activity. Units and individuals under the command of the Special Squadron are to cease military activities and operations immediately and place themselves under the command of the nearest superior officer." Taniguchi slowly folded the paper. For the first time, Onoda realized this was no trick, no subterfuge. It was real. Major Taniguchi slowly folded up the order, and for the first time I realized that no subterfuge was involved. This was no trick. Everything I heard was real, Onoda recalled. "We really lost the war. How could they have been so sloppy?" Suddenly, everything went black. He wept. On March 10, 1974, 28 years, 6 months, and 8 days after Japan's surrender, Hiroo Onoda formally surrendered to Philippine forces at the radar base on Lubang. He wore his original uniform, now tattered but still intact. He carried his officer's sword, his rifle, ammunition, hand grenades, and the dagger his mother had given him 3 decades earlier. The next day, he was flown to Manila for a formal surrender ceremony with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos. In an act of extraordinary mercy, Marcos pardoned Onoda for the killings of approximately 30 Filipino civilians and police officers during his 3-decade holdout, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances. Onoda presented his sword to Marcos, who returned it to him as a gesture of reconciliation. On March 12, 1974, Hiroo Onoda arrived at New Tokyo International Airport. He had been declared dead in 1959. Now, at 52 years old, he was coming home to a nation that had changed beyond recognition. The reception was overwhelming. Crowds waved flags and cheered. His aging parents wept. News cameras captured every moment. To many Japanese, Onoda represented something they feared they had lost: the old virtues of duty, perseverance, and sacrifice. A newspaper editorial declared, "To this soldier, duty took precedence over personal sentiments. Onoda has shown us that there is much more in life than just material affluence and selfish pursuits." But Onoda himself was disoriented. Skyscrapers had replaced wooden buildings. Highways choked with cars had replaced quiet streets. Television, jet planes, pollution. It was overwhelming. "There are so many tall buildings and automobiles in Tokyo," he said. "Television might be convenient, but it has no influence on my life here." He was offered a large sum of money in back pay from the Japanese government. He refused it. When well-wishers pressed money upon him, he donated it to Yasukuni Shrine. In 1975, seeking escape from the attention and a simpler way of life, Onoda moved to Brazil, where he became a cattle farmer in the Japanese-Brazilian community of Colonia Jamique in Terrenos, Mato Grosso do Sul. He married Machie Onuku, a Japanese tea ceremony teacher, in 1976. But Brazil was not an escape from recognition. He was awarded the Santos Dumont Merit Medal by the Brazilian Air Force in 2004 and made an honorary citizen of Mato Grosso do Sul in 2010. In 1984, disturbed by rising materialism and a famous case of a Japanese teenager who murdered his parents, Onoda returned to Japan and established the Onoda Shizenjuku, Onoda Nature School. The camp taught young people survival skills, self-reliance, and the traditional values he felt his homeland had forgotten. In 1996, Onoda made a difficult journey. He returned to Lubang Island, the site of his 3-decade ordeal. His wife had arranged a $10,000 scholarship donation to the local school. But the visit was not without pain. The town council presented him with a resolution asking him to compensate the families of 7 people he was alleged to have killed, and about 50 relatives of victims staged a protest. It was a stark reminder that for some, he was not a hero, but a killer. In a 1995 interview with the Associated Press, Onoda reflected on his extraordinary life. "I don't consider those 30 years a waste of time. Without that experience, I wouldn't have my life today." He showed no bitterness. Instead, he spoke of making up for lost time. "I do everything twice as fast so I can make up for the 30 years. I wish someone could eat and sleep for me so I can work 24 hours a day." On January 16, 2014, Hiroo Onoda died of heart failure resulting from pneumonia at St. Luke's International Hospital in Tokyo. He was 91 years old. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga paid tribute. "I vividly remember that I was reassured of the end of the war when Mr. Onoda returned to Japan." Hiroo Onoda's story is one of the most extraordinary tales to emerge from World War II, not because of battles won or territory gained, but because of what it reveals about the human capacity for duty, endurance, and the struggle to let go. His memoir, No Surrender, My 30-Year War, remains in print and continues to find new readers decades after its publication. It is a testament to a man who, against all odds, kept his word. Onoda was not the last holdout. That distinction belongs to Private Teruo Nakamura, arrested in Indonesia in December 1974, 9 months after Onoda's surrender. But he remains the most famous, the one whose story captured the world's imagination and forced a reckoning with questions that have no easy answers. What is duty? When does loyalty become tragedy? How do you go home when home no longer exists? Perhaps Onoda himself provided the best answer. In those rare moments when he allowed himself to look back, he did not see wasted years. He saw a life shaped by an experience that most could never imagine, and a quiet pride in having endured it. "I was fortunate that I could devote myself to my duty in my young and vigorous years," he said upon his return to Japan. Asked what had been on his mind all that time in the jungle, he replied simply, "Nothing but accomplishing my duty." If you found this story compelling, subscribe to Echoes of World War II, the History Vault, for more forgotten stories from the war that changed the world.